Welcome everyone to another community office hours for Terraform. In this one, we're going to be covering the 1.1 release. We got a lot of new stuff that we're going to talk about, a lot of things that have been a long time coming. But before we get into that, I do need to cover our community guidelines, which are to be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient in all times, be considerate, be respectful, and be professional. Now, these are all pretty simple, but just in case, I'm going to go ahead and throw up a little banner here that just puts that there just in case you forget. Now, on our stream today, we've got some guests that if you're plugged into our community, you've seen around before, but it'd probably be good to do some guest introductions. So why don't we just go first name alphabetical here. Brian, why don't you kick us off with who you are and what you do?
Hey everyone, hey, thanks so much, Cole. I'm Brian Fladd. I'm a senior software engineer on the Terraform provider development experience team, and I've been at HashiCorp for about 4 years now.
I'm Chris. I'm engineering lead over on the Terraform practitioner team. That team kind of deals a lot with kind of the intersection between Terraform OSS and CLI and Terraform Cloud. And I've also been around coming up on 3.5 years, almost 4 years. Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Korinne Alpers. I'm a product manager on the Terraform open source project, as well as the practitioner team with Chris as well. And I've been at HashiCorp now a little bit over 5 months.
Hey, I'm Cole Morrison. I'm a developer advocate here at HashiCorp. All right, so let's go ahead and move into what our agenda is for today. So first up, we're going to just talk about the whole release just in general, and then we're going to dive into each of those features. And we've got some demos for some of those, and we're going to talk about it from a product perspective, practitioner perspective, and we'll even get a little bit of insight on what it looks like from the provider perspective as well. And then at the end, we'll talk about what is up in 2022 as much as we can. So why don't we go ahead and set the stage for the entire thing we'll be talking about. This release brings a lot of stuff. And before the stream, I was actually talking to Chris because back when I started, this whole movement of getting Terraform Cloud more into the core workflow for the practitioner was a big theme, and it's finally here. So Korinne, I kind of wanted to pass it over to you and just set the stage. You know, what were the big ideas and themes, and what problems and pain points from the practitioner, user, customer perspective drove the things that became part of this release?
Sure thing. All right, so Terraform 1.1 was just released December 8th. So if you haven't seen the announcement blog, I'd highly recommend diving into it. But from a high level, the two core themes that we wanted to ship in this release are basically providing a way to easily and more safely refactor. And then secondly, to improve the current CLI experience for our Terraform cloud and enterprise users. So to start with the easier and safer refactoring, as many of you know, the traditional ways of refactoring was to use Terraform state move from the CLI, and that could be a very cumbersome, error-prone process. The general problems that we were seeing were open source users were basically having to rename state objects as well as update their configuration at the same time. And managing that could be just a bunch of individual tasks. And for our Terraform cloud users, unless you had admin access on the workspace, this wasn't really possible at all. And even if you did have that access, you would need to go ahead and switch to like a local mode in order to do those commands via the CLI and then go ahead and update. And again, that wasn't really within the core workflows and not a great process for many of our customers, as well as just generally smaller teams. And then lastly, for module authors, if you are trying to do some refactoring, again, you would need to basically release like a new major version to indicate a breaking change, as well as do the refactoring. And this just wasn't ideal. And a lot of teams, obviously, as you grow out your configuration or grow out your entire infrastructure, you're going to need to do refactoring at some point in time. And so we are shipped this new mechanism using move statements to do refactoring within the module's like own source code. So you can do a plan and then validate all your changes. And we'll have a demo of that as well to show exactly what that looks like. But basically, you can use these move statements to show how you've renamed a resource or a module. You can enable counter for each for a resource or a module call. And you can also split one module into multiples, which is really what a lot of people when they're refactoring are going to do. And secondly, we can talk about the CLI experience for Terraform Cloud, and Chris can walk you through a demo to show you exactly what all the cool things that we did. But to give you a high level view of why we wanted to target this was Terraform Cloud, when we first shipped it, was really focused on the VCS connection workflow. There's 3 overall workflows that a lot of people use. It's VCS, so something like hooking up your GitHub repo and using that entire workflow to update your Terraform configuration and make sure it goes through like a series of checks. However, a lot of people who are using or migrating from like open source Terraform are probably expecting to use the same workflow that they're accustomed to, which is the CLI driven workflow. And the previous experience just wasn't really as much great and as helpful or intuitive as we wanted. So we invested a bunch of time into making a cloud integration that was just more representative of what people expect for Terraform Cloud. So previously we went and you would hook up a remote backend. So you would configure within a backend block remote, and then somehow you would need to have this mental model of this is Terraform Cloud. And then if you get errors and those kinds of things, be understanding that remote equals Terraform Cloud and make sure that you to fully understand that path. And we wanted to make it more easy that when you just sign up for Terraform Cloud, it's just Terraform Cloud. And so we created this new cloud block within the Terraform top level settings. You can go ahead and configure your host name if you're using Terraform Enterprise, as well as use workspace tags. So you can update within your own configuration. I want to add some tags like networking prod, that sort of thing. And then you can see within the Terraform Cloud UI that it's represented there, as well as within the CLI if you want to just look at what workspaces you have. And again, Chris will walk you through this demo because me talking to you about it is not going to be as informative as a demo would be. And secondly, the big thing that we wanted to tackle was people weren't super aware of Terraform Cloud's importance in the workflow. So people would often think of it, because it was in that backend block, as just a place where to store state, when really the true value in it comes with remote operations. So not only can you store remotely your state file, you can also execute remotely. And by putting it up within the Terraform top level, we're kind of separating it from backends are for state storage only. So what people are used to, like storing it with locally or storing it in S3 bucket, that kind of thing. And now Terraform Cloud is where you can run remotely as well as do other tasks like Sentinel policies, those kinds of things, and store state. And lastly, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but we added a bit more helpful error messages just to improve the overall developer experience. So things like really just helping the user figure out you need to name a workspace, or these are the kinds of flows that you need to go through, as well as onboarding in general. So if you need to reconfigure or you need to migrate state, they walk you through the entire process in a much more intuitive manner. And that is the overall 1.1 release.
Nice. So it seems like, the theme of course, 1.0 was stabilizing and locking a lot of things in. This time around, we have a lot of not low-hanging fruit. We have a lot of mid-hanging fruit, right, around your cloud experience, around your module creation experience, around some other different flows for your CLI experience, right? And it looks like those all got tackled in this release, at least the bigger ones. So I wanted to ask Chris, from an engineering perspective, being one of the people that worked on this, what did this look like in the background for those of people that are interested in what happened into making this go on to play? Because I remember talking to you some time ago that it wasn't as simple as we just make it, right? There was a lot of stuff that had to change to bring all of these things to fruition. Yeah,
architecturally speaking, the remote backend was added to Terraform in, I believe, 0.12. It was back in 2018. And it was kind of built along kind of the predecessor to Terraform Cloud as we know it today. There was like a Terraform Enterprise SaaS. There were a couple of different offerings as we were beginning to, make out a service for Terraform, where the remote backend was kind of built in that time. And since then, we've done a lot more things with the Terraform Cloud platform, and there were a lot of edges where you could see that like, oh, this was actually built for this other thing. And we've never had really the chance to be able to go back and really correct a lot of those different things until this year. So in most, a good chunk of 2021 for the practitioner team has been kind of, starting over, kind of looking at it and being like, all right, how can we deliver some value and kind of bring the CLI driven workflow of Terraform Cloud, into the modern age, I guess, of Terraform Cloud. So yeah, it's been a long journey throughout the year, and we're happy to really see it come to fruition here in 1.1.
Nice. And to bridge engineering and product here, we obviously have the provider ecosystem, which is very much the lifeblood of Terraform. Brian, you obviously know a ton about that. What does this release do for our folks out there who are working on providers or work with them daily, right?
Yeah, so from a practitioner standpoint, these refactoring changes that are starting to happen with Terraform CLI, they're really kind of like taking a step back and taking a look at people's workflows in general. So, the typical workflow that people normally apply for a lot of things is make a change in your, configurations and hopefully push that up to like some sort of version control system, run Terraform plan on it, then Terraform apply, and rinse and repeat as much as necessary. But when you start getting into some of these other scenarios like refactoring configurations or trying to move around things, basically, there's gaps in that where there's no way in the configuration necessarily to make these changes or propose them in a certain way or have guardrails that happen. And then, you go to actually make these changes, they require you to go outside of that plan apply workflow. You maybe need to run like a state move command or something. And yeah, it's a little confusing and it's a little awkward sometimes. And especially if a lot of folks are working in the same, modules or same configurations, it can get a little hairy sometimes too, because, if you need to make that change, it needs to be kind of like done by itself after you've made the configuration change, but don't apply in between. And so there can be a little bit of awkwardness there. And this hopefully kind of helps align with like a larger vision that Terraform itself, we really love that plan apply workflow. And the more and more ways that we can bring that sort of workflow into changes that you want for your infrastructure, I think that's where this is really coming in and super clutch.
That is such a good way to theme that up. How much can we keep and plan and apply? I love that. Nice. All right. Well, thank you. That kind of hit a light bulb to the point where it just drained all my electricity. So I'm coming back from being mind blown there, Brian. So let's go ahead and move into the major features now that we've got the themes under our belts here. And the first one we're going to touch on today was the new cloud experience, right? So everything around that. Korinne, I'm sorry to make you do it again because I know you just gave us an entire album of what was happening. So I'm going to have you drop us in again. You can go a little bit more in depth with this new thing that we're bringing to unifying the cloud experience with the CLI experience and the like.
Sure. Okay. So to introduce it, we basically, in a very short summary, shipped a new cloud integration. It is similar to what the remote backend was doing and intends to do the same thing, but it is a whole new integration as an alternative or a successor to the remote backend, the previous way of connecting to Terraform Cloud. So Chris will show you how you can basically define and configure your Terraform Cloud connection, and you can go ahead and say things like, this is my workspace name, or you could use your workspace tags. And once you do Terraform init, go ahead and set that up, and you are connected to Terraform Cloud and walk through all the steps of going ahead and doing your first plan and apply. Also, just to quickly plug in, if you haven't used Terraform Cloud, a lot of people don't know this, we actually have a free tier. It's very generous. You can sign up, I think, up to 5 people, do remote states, remote operations, all kinds of things. And I highly recommend checking it out. It's a lot easier than hooking up a bunch of separate tools. So yes, the cloud backend or cloud configuration, the way that you go ahead and connect to Terraform Cloud was in that Terraform top level settings. And through that, again, to summarize, the main things that we really wanted to hit was better error messages and better just developer experience in general. Clarifying remote state versus remote operations. So backends, just to remind you, that's for storing state. The cloud integration itself, or Terraform Cloud, is for remote state and operations plus more, things like Sentinel policies, etc. And lastly, am I forgetting exactly the last one? Oh, better understand Terraform workspaces in general. So tags, we'll walk you through what that looks like. But Terraform workspace, just to quickly tell people, because it's a little bit confusing if you're used to Terraform CLI workspaces. A workspace is just how you manage a collection of infrastructure, and it contains everything that Terraform needs in order to run whatever you're trying to Terraform apply. So instead of Terraform CLI is how you would basically rename a state file. A Terraform cloud workspace is really just everything. It is like basically a separate working directory.
Nice. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Nice. You
Yeah.
didn't trip over your words once there. Nice.
Thank
Well,
you. Yes.
we have the demo. So a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of things going into this. And if you've worked with remote backends, this is going to be something you probably are going to be very excited to see. So unless we have any other pre-commentary, Brian or Chris, I'd love to hand the demo over to you, Chris, and show the world.
Sure. Yeah. No, Korinne nailed it really. I mean, I think that it's hard to fit in such a small, Korinne talking there in a minute, just how many different things we were doing with this, just because it's both like clarification and improvement of user experience along with some new features. I mean, there's some completely new things that were not available previously on the platform before this. As well as just like kind of clarifying and repositioning like how the CLI really works with Terraform Cloud, like what it is, you know what I mean? So like the remote backend in general, right? It's kind of confusing to even talk about really. Like before we even get into the screen here, you can hear the word remote used in like 4 different contexts, which is really hard for someone who's coming into Terraform to really understand, right? If you're dealing with like state backends, that's actually referred to in Terraform as remote backends, right? They're all remote backends, but that's different from the remote backend, right? And that backend is special because it, is one that handles operations. It's kind of this extra added feature that makes it very different from all the other backends, which is just a whole. I mean, we're already getting into a whole lot of mental overhead about what the heck that thing even is, right? And even more than that, like you can configure a workspace to run locally with the remote backend, which is a remote backend. We could just go around in circles all day. Let's just keep doing this all day long. Anyways, yeah. Yeah, let's get started and take a look here.
Oh. All right. May the demo gods be with you.
All right. Yeah, we will see. Okay, so
whoops.
Let's get started. There we go. All right, let's get started. I have like a really basic configuration here. It uses the random provider, one of our most favorite providers, which basically just generates these random pet computer names, right? And they're resources that are stored purely in Terraform state in memory and don't actually provision, any, cloud infrastructure ever, because that's not what we're here to really look at today. Super basic random pet block with a couple of output animal names and like a trio, a count of 3. And then I'll also put in an expression and output terraform.workspace. So we're using Terraform, just the local backend, local state, etc. I already applied a couple of times and got everything set up. So if I do a Terraform workspace list, you can see that I'm using 3 workspaces. One is this default workspace, and that's the unnamed default workspace that you would use as a Terraform user if you basically don't use workspaces. You always use a workspace, but if you don't use the Terraform workspace feature, the workspace that you're using is a workspace called default, right? And you can continue to create new, workspaces with Terraform workspace new, etc. And that's what I did. I have 3 workspaces: default, prod, and staging. So if I want to begin using this new integration in my CLI with Terraform Cloud, the very first thing I'll need to do is to log in. I need to actually get an authentication token for my local CLI to work with Terraform Cloud. And I can do that via Terraform login. And what Terraform login is going to do is it's going to prompt me to go ahead and open up my browser. And it's going to be the wrong browser because of demo stuff. And
Sorry, Chris. I know I
that's
made
all
you
right.
move to Chrome.
No, this is good stuff. I use a Firefox, and the screencast we're using doesn't like Firefox apparently. Anyways, this is the window that popped up. I can create an API token. I'll just name it as Terraform login, call that done. And when I go back to my CLI, I can go ahead and enter in the token and log in. And this is what it looks like. Cute little Terraform logo and everything else. You can see documentation. You can get a little getting started guide, do what you want. I'm going to use the configuration that we already have up on the screen. I've authenticated properly. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually add that Terraform cloud block. So my configuration looks like this. I have a main.tf on my left, and I have just a separate Terraform file that I'll use for a backend or Terraform cloud. Again, backends are for storing state, including the remote backend. Using Terraform Cloud is kind of mutually exclusive of backends. So you don't use a backend anymore. You can just go ahead and configure Terraform Cloud directly, and it is now a native integration, a part of Terraform that adds a bunch of stuff on top of it and isn't just kind of abstracted into its own little corner with a backend. So how I go ahead and get started is by adding a block that looks like this. Cloud in the Terraform settings block. I can specify my Terraform cloud organization and the tags, the workspace tags that I would like to associate with this particular configuration, right? So in Terraform Cloud, workspaces are all owned by a particular organization. And that's for like all of my infrastructure in my business, right? It's not a particular configuration with many workspaces. It's an organization full of workspaces. So in order to associate a subset of those organization workspaces to this configuration on my CLI, I can actually map using workspace tags to say, hey, this configuration, I'd like to run it with these workspaces in Terraform Cloud. That's how this new integration works. So when I can specify really whatever I want. I can pretend that like this configuration that I'm moving from Terraform local to Terraform Cloud maybe has something to do with networking. So I'm going to add the networking tag. And maybe I want to say like, oh, well, this configuration, these workspaces I want to say came from the CLI. So I'm just going to use a little colon here and say, hey, source CLI, right? With that block in place, all I have to do is run Terraform init. And what it will do is it will initialize. And if I have existing states like we do here, I'll be guided through the process of how I can move from my local Terraform to Terraform Cloud. Now, one of the steps is when you're using Terraform Cloud, you have to have an explicit name for your workspace. And you'll notice from the very beginning, we had this default unnamed workspace, right? Well, when you're moving over to cloud, one of the things that you need to do is give that unnamed workspace a name. It really doesn't matter what it is here for the demo. I'll just call it test, call it good, and then move on. Next thing that I need to do. And again, all these steps are dependent on what you had in the first place. Like if we didn't have a default workspace, it wouldn't have asked me. It only does the steps that I need to do to complete the migration over to cloud. The next thing it's going to ask me to do is, hey, remember the thing that we just talked about where it's like the organization has all of the workspaces. It's all of my infrastructure across my organization. It's not just one configuration. Because of that, the way that workspaces are typically done in Terraform Cloud is that they're named appropriately depending on like their component and their environment and their region. So like for this example with like networking, maybe it's called networking prod US East for my networking infrastructure that I have in US East for the production environment. Well, in order to make that transition over into using Terraform Cloud workspaces, I might want to rename them basically. So an easy way to do that, instead of just going through one by one or whatever, is by giving Terraform Cloud a pattern based on what the previous workspace was. Remember, we had like prod and staging, right? Well, what is prod and staging in the larger grand scheme of things? We'll say that this is networking with the existing workspace name. So my workspace that it was before was just prod. When we go to Terraform Cloud, it'll now be networking prod. And you can do whatever pattern you want. You can do a prefix, a suffix, one in the middle, anything like that. Does that make sense? Any questions there? Yeah. All right.
We have like some other questions, but we'll ask them at the end of the demo.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So when I enter a value and a pattern, what Terraform will go out and do is create and migrate all of those existing workspaces and states to Terraform Cloud. And this is what my workspaces now look like, both in Terraform CLI and in Terraform Cloud. If I go browse over to Terraform Cloud now, you can see that these are the workspaces that we just had. And I should have showed you before. Those weren't there before. They're now completely new workspaces with those states that I had in my local CLI migrated over to cloud with their appropriate tags and whatnot. So with that in place, I can now do a Terraform workspace list. And I can see exactly what I had before, except now I'm fully migrated. So I can do a Terraform workspace select, oops, no, can't autocomplete that. Sorry. Let's see here, list. I can select whichever workspace I want. Let's just use the staging one that's already selected. And now if I do a Terraform apply, let's do that quick just to get rid of that old state. Now if I do a Terraform apply on that workspace, we'll see that we'll get going here in Terraform Cloud. So now the apply is running remotely in Terraform Cloud. You can see this workspace will start churning here in a second. And now I'm running remotely in Terraform Cloud. So the process is running now in Terraform Cloud. Terraform Cloud adds a bunch of other features that we're not going to demo here, like policy checking, cost estimation, all those different things. And the results of that is streamed directly to my local console right here. And it's asking me whether or not I want to continue or not. And I do. So yeah, that's the basic nutshell of moving from your local CLI over to Terraform Cloud. If I got a little bit extra time, I can also show, so for the remote backend users that have already been using the remote backend, there's also a very special kind of streamlined migration path where instead of going through and like thinking about renaming workspaces or whatever, we can actually streamline you forward to using the workspaces that you were before. Is that something we're interested in looking at?
Oh yeah. Totally.
Sure. Yeah, let's go for it. And actually, before we do that, even let's talk a little bit more about the cloud block here. Like, if you are a backend user, while we're on the topic now, you might think, wow, this looks a lot like the remote backend, right? Well, that's intentional. That's actually a very much an intentional design feature of this new integration, is that we want to get all the benefits that we were just talking about previously on the broadcast here, while not completely redoing everything and requiring such a hard migration over to this new native integration. So it'll actually be very, very familiar. You can provide a host name, just like the remote backend. You can do all sorts of things that are very, very similar. The part where things change beyond just new features and whatnot is like kind of a revamped user experience in the CLI. So let's pretend, for example, it's invalid to give a configuration that doesn't have workspaces. Like, you need to be able to map your local and your Terraform Cloud workspaces appropriately, right? So if I do a Terraform init with that, I get this kind of new revamped error message. Whereas before, you'll probably get a message that's like, oh, the configuration is valid, or oh, the remote host responded error 500, or I don't know, something very generic, something that doesn't really help me a whole lot. Well, the whole point of this integration is to give a more native Terraform Cloud experience in the CLI. And you can see that in the error message that we have right here, saying that, hey, you need to tell me how to map my workspaces appropriately. Here are the different ways you can do it. If you choose one, this is what's going to happen. All the different bit of user context that's much more rich and helpful to bring to a CLI user. So let's try out I got to kind of reset here, existing remote backend use case. So if I have a remote backend block that looks like that, I'm going to kind of reset things here. Okay. So Using the remote backend, let's take a look at my Terraform Cloud organization again. The workspaces that we're going to be dealing with in this example are these ones right here: billing prod, billing staging, right? My backend configuration was using this thing called prefix, which kind of overloads and obfuscates thing in the sense that it encodes my intentions of what the workspace is used for within the name. It's very rigid. It's kind of hard to deal with. The tags you can already kind of see is a big improvement in the new CLI integration. But let's take a look. So I initialized it saying I need to choose a workspace. I'm going to choose that. We're using the remote backend, and you can already see kind of a difference between what we had before. Before, using that encoding of name, you can see I have prod and staging, and in Terraform Cloud, they're not called prod and staging. They're called billing prod and billing staging because it uses that prefix. But let's talk about the migration now. So if I'm using the remote backend now, I'm a user that wants to move on to using the better native integration for Terraform Cloud. How do I do that? What does that look like? Well, it really is as simple as getting rid of that block, moving to this block, which again is remarkably similar. It's basically moving that block name over and then selecting a tag. Now, for the tags, you can use whatever you want, of course. But for this example, we had billing prod, billing staging. Maybe we'll just use a billing tag, right? So I'll go ahead and do that. And then again, as always, when it comes to state and workspaces in Terraform, all I have to do is Terraform init. We'll start migrating. And this one is different. Instead of overhead of like, oh, maybe you have to rename the default workspace, maybe you need to provide a pattern or whatever. You may have been using Terraform Cloud before. You might have already been using a workspace, and the workspaces are fully delimited already in Terraform Cloud. So we don't need to like redo that stuff. Well, Terraform is smart enough to see that and actually acknowledge that, like, hey, you were using prefix before. We can tell that you were using that. So like, do you just want to make everything right again? Well, yes, I do. I would like everything to just work and just kind of be done with it. So I'll just say yes. And sure enough, it exactly migrates over to what it actually is in Terraform Cloud now: billing prod, billing staging. I can, do a Terraform apply and be on my merry way with the cloud integration instead of the remote backend.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Cool. It's nice. You don't have to worry about like moving things over. It's really, that was really a big design staple over the last year, is figuring out like, okay, well, we want to make these really big improvements, but we don't want to make it overbearing for people to be able to migrate from one to the other, right? And that, I think, is a very good outcome for that sort of migration. So,
Absolutely.
now we've talked a lot about migrating. We've talked a lot about like moving states over, whatever. Let's just spend a couple more minutes talking about more of like we talked about the UX as well. Let's talk more about like enhancements. Like, what did we actually fix? What did we actually add to it? I'll mention two things. One is simply just that Terraform.workspace works, right? Like this, if you're a user of the remote backend, you might have experienced this for years now, where like there's these weird edges where, in this case, the default workspace would always be used regardless, right? It's literally in the documentation. It says like, you can't use Terraform.workspace, the interpolation, anymore because it just doesn't line up. We'll eventually fix it, whatever. Well, that was in 2018. 2021 now, we're here. We did the thing. The new cloud integration actually lines that up such that it is exactly what you would expect, which I won't bother demoing here for time. So that's nice. And the other cool thing about that is that because Terraform Cloud itself uses the integration that we're talking about here, this is solved across all of the different workflows. So like, you don't need to be using CLI necessarily to get this benefit. If you're using like the VCS workflow or whatever, this is also fixed in all the different workflows. So that's just kind of a nice little edge that's kind of always bothered people for a long time. The one thing that we will show, another kind of asked for feature over the years, has been input variables, right? So before, when you initialize the remote backend and you got started with a configuration, let's just go ahead and change something here. Let's change the length, the number of random pets to a variable. Let's say r.pet count. We'll go up here and we'll say variable count. And oh yeah, type number. So, before, if you ran Terraform apply, which again we won't bother doing here, you would be presented with an error that the variable was not found. And the reason for that is all of your variables, when you moved on to Terraform Cloud, were stored in the workspace itself. So you'd need to go into the workspace, into the web UI here, and actually configure the variables before you could even get started. This was kind of cumbersome. And the reason for this, and just for fun, let's just do an apply to kind of show that off. The reason for this is because it's tough to iterate. Like imagine like working on a Terraform configuration and not being able to just like change the count to be able to try. No, there it is. There's no value for it, right? I don't have it in my Terraform Cloud workspace. The inability to be able to try things out to like, oh, what happens if I change this value? Then what does the plan look like, etc. Really tough to do that sort of thing. So now, basically, variables just work. So you can use an input variable and say like, I would like to apply with var equals, and I need to escape in my console here, pet count equal to, we'll say 4. I hope that was right. Nope, I did the thing. What'd I do? Uh-oh. Oh. Did I save this? Try that. Uh-oh. No, I think it's to do with my escaping of my terminal, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
All good. It wouldn't be a demo if there wasn't at least.
No, definitely always. Hey, I can escape things on my local terminal correctly. Woo! Look at me go. Now it did the right thing. So now we just changed the countdown via an input variable. So all sorts of little small things like that. Yeah, I think that's there's a lot more enhancements. There's a lot more, a couple of other things, but we've talked about it enough. So yeah, that's the Terraform Cloud integration in Terraform 101.
Nice. I know, like when people would bring up working with Terraform Cloud for whatever reason, there were so many other big things, but the input variables was always like the one people would like beeline to immediately. Like, I can't really do that. Now that's in here. So do those show up in Terraform Cloud if you set them from the CLI as well, right?
So the persisted variables in a Terraform Cloud workspace are there and managed within Terraform Cloud, because there might be values that like you want to keep secret or are sensitive or whatever persisted in the Terraform Cloud workspace. But the input variables, or rather the values, not even so much the variables, from the CLI kind of allow more of like an iterative, like try things out. And maybe in the end, I would like to then go and actually add that permanently into my Terraform Cloud workspace.
Nice. So as we went through the demo, there's a lot of stuff there. Yeah, I wanted to toss the mic over to Brian. Were there any things going through there that you're like, I want to highlight this in from your perspective, from provider perspective, from practitioner perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, just that kind of like stepping through and getting the ability to onboard with Terraform Cloud or even migrate to Terraform Cloud. It feels more natural, and the parts where it might be confusing are a little less confusing, because so much of it is just asking you directly and providing a bunch of context about why it's asking you these questions. For example, like Chris explained hopefully pretty well, I thought like, the differences between workspaces that are local and there's like no namespacing or anything going on. And then, if you're doing it up in Terraform Cloud, it's like fully namespaced and all these good things going on. So I think that the ability in there to have all those questions that are being asked, and also that really nice thing of like being able to do suffix, prefix, whatever in there is like super cool. I think that'll be very helpful for people.
Yeah, when you showed the moving from migrating, I was like, this is gonna be a nightmare. Nope. I was like, oh wow, the amount of cold sweat you are saving the world.
Yeah. No, Yeah, I mean, of all the things, just the simple clarification of what it is you're doing. Like before, it's like, what is a remote backend? Why is a remote backend so different from all the other backends? Like I'm used to using the S3 backend, but like this other backend does completely different stuff, and I don't know why. Like there's just a lot of kind of weird, confusing edges there that I'm glad we were able to smooth out, and the user experience part of it that Brian touched on, of just having context and being, told like, all right, this might be a problem, like this is why, etc., is just a really big improvement, I think.
Yeah, I think just the fact that like, oh, Terraform might not be the only thing people are looking at today, or in their normal day-to-day workflows, and having like that terminology explained as you go along, I think is extremely helpful.
Nice. The last thing I wanted to touch on before we move forward. Obviously, we've got these bigger features we're going to spend some time on, and then the last three we'll kind of go through them. But Korinne, something that for me as a practitioner, at least 3-4 years ago, that I'd love you to elaborate on was like, y'all asked me to get on Terraform Cloud, and it takes like the setup time for me to get going from where the productivity wasn't exactly there. And if I'm trying something on new, I'm used to open source, I'm used to free stuff, it's going to take me like all day. I'm not going to necessarily do it. So what impact does this have on like the time for you as a new practitioner, someone who's not in Terraform Cloud getting onto it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that was pretty much when we even started this project. No matter what, we knew that the setup time had to be shortened. Like we wanted to like map out the number of steps it took to sign up for Terraform Cloud. That had to be shrunk by X amount of steps, as well as like the migration path. Like that was the absolute bare minimum, was the migration path had to be the easiest thing that was possible and the most intuitive. So ideally you wouldn't need to look up docs or something. You could just walk through the steps. And that's why, Terraform Cloud came out as a product, was really, we wanted to make the easiest and most effective way to use Terraform at any scale. So even as an individual or a team or a large business. So I think it has a huge impact, but we're always open to more feedback about how we can make it easier to go and sign up for Terraform Cloud or use it at any stage in any familiarity you are with Terraform. Speaking of which, if people have feedback, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or sometimes I'm on the subreddit as well. And I'm always happy to chat with anybody. Yeah.
Nice. All right, so before we move into the next feature, I did want to zip through some questions here. And just a note for those of you tuning in later, since this will be up on YouTube, we will have markers underneath so you can go between features of interest. So first one, DJ Opesius, I'm probably botching that username. You asked a question about troubleshooting and debugging variables. We actually, when we get to the type function in the Terraform console command feature at the end, we'll actually address that then. But I just wanted you to know that we did see it. The next thing, Chris, what IDE are you using? That was something that DJ Curry sent wanted to know.
IDE? Yeah. Oh, I just use Vim.
Yeah.
I use Vim and lots of goodies in it. I'm one of those Vim users that actually isn't afraid to like move in and just add whatever package or whatever cool thing gives me kind of an IDE like experience. So yeah.
Nice. Are you on just vanilla Vim, or are you using like NeoVim?
NeoVim.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. Sweet. So there's your answer. And then the next one's a little bit more general, and it was just around clarity for the Terraform Workspace command in context of Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud, and then just other backends. If Sandil, if you can elaborate more, please do. But if not, could any of you who want to take that just maybe give us sort of a quick bit on what the Terraform workspaces are for, right? The general idea of them, and then their usage with Terraform Enterprise and Cloud, and then other backends.
Sure, I can start with that if we want to do that. Yeah, so Terraform workspaces just in open source in CLI are basically nothing more than a state file rename. That's all they really are. There's anything more complicated than that. So when you do a Terraform workspace new, you're basically just instructing Terraform, hey, when you make the next plan or do the next apply, I want you to use this state file instead of that state file. And the original use case for that was basically creating different deployment environments, kind of what I showed in the demo there. You can have like this is my staging infrastructure, this is my production infrastructure, etc. That's all fine and dandy. But what Terraform Cloud does when you move over to using the platform is workspaces are now an entire collection of infrastructure, kind of with their own working directory, and have their own run context. Basically, they're basically their own set. And Terraform Cloud adds a whole bunch of stuff on top of that in terms of like persisted input variables, their own state, just like OSS does. Policy checking, it's basically the main building block of how you manage multiple configurations and multiple infrastructures in a Terraform Cloud organization. Hopefully that answers the question.
There you have it. I thought that was pretty good. If that wasn't enough, just put it in the chat and we'll bring it up again later. The other quick question here is just, do we have Sentinel policies for managing workspaces creation on Terraform Enterprise?
You do in the form, so like if you were to provision, there actually is, and my team maintains a Terraform Cloud Terraform provider. So you can actually provision Terraform Cloud with Terraform itself. A lot of people use like these kind of meta bootstrapping workspaces to be able to provision in Terraform Cloud with Terraform Cloud. And as part of that main Terraform plan apply workflow, you can add Sentinel policy checking and basically get exactly that. Like if you're creating new workspaces using this provider, using Terraform, you can validate certain conditions and whatnot in Sentinel policy checking. Yeah.
Perfect. That was on point. All right, looks like that's all the questions we've got for now. So let's go ahead and move on to the next really big feature, and that is the big change around Terraform state move, right? And I know that this has a lot to do currently, especially the demos and the ideas around modules, which are, as you grow your infrastructure as code, or something you wind up having to get into. And of course, if you leverage the ones that we have, but they're verified ones, the ones that come from our partners and community ones that can speed things up for you. But if you're creating them, you can run into some snafus that maybe aren't so pleasant. So Korinne, could you give us the history of this here? So like what problem was it addressing, and then take us into the feature in general?
Sure thing. Okay. To set up basically prior to this release, how people would go ahead and refactor their Terraform configurations, you basically, as Cole mentioned, you would need to use Terraform state move via the CLI. And this presented a lot of different problems. And I guess like to take a step back really quick, I'm assuming many people know why refactoring is necessary, but in case you don't, oftentimes when you're building out your infrastructure and it gets more complex and it just gets larger in general, you're going to have a very large Terraform configuration, and you're going to at some point need to move things around to make it easier to make changes and just understand exactly what you're creating. However, Terraform state, the file itself, basically is constantly reconciling what you have in your configuration versus what is out in the real world. And sometimes when you're moving things around, you want to make sure that you're not actually just destroying and recreating infrastructure. Obviously, because you don't want to take down a critical database, or just in general, like downtime is not something that you want to do for refactoring purposes. So we were investigating ways that we can make refactoring easier. And we talked about earlier in the session about making things as much as part of the plan and apply process as possible. And this is part of that initiative. So how could we make things part of the core Terraform plan and apply workflow? And so we introduced this new mechanism called move statements. And the main things we were looking at in terms of solving pain points were the three big pain points for our different types of users. Mainly just if you're a regular Terraform practitioner, just someone who's managing infrastructure like on a smaller team, or just yourself. Basically, if you're able to do and touch state from the CLI, that's not something that is super comfortable. You don't necessarily always want to touch state, and you would need to coordinate a bunch of changes, like multiple chain commands via the CLI, as well as updating your configuration. And then if an error arises, Godspeed. And trying to figure out exactly where that problem happened is really, really difficult. And oftentimes you're just trying to make your life easier. So that wasn't working. So the next big pain point we were tackling was for like module developers and of shared modules. As I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to go ahead and say, okay, I refactored a module, I want to go ahead and release it out to the public or to the people that want to go ahead and use this. To do that, you would need to go ahead and release a new major version, say I have a breaking change, and then also deliver a bunch of basically instructions to the end user of like, okay, now you need to update state, and this is the way that you need to do it. Which again, extremely manual, very error prone, not something you want to mess with. And then lastly, our Terraform Cloud and Enterprise users oftentimes can only really do anything that is part of the plan operation. So refactoring is not something that a lot of people would have access to. And if they did, so let's say you had admin access on a workspace, you would go ahead, switch to local, do out of band changes to refactor, and then go ahead and just hope that nothing bad happens. And so we really wanted to have a way that across those three personas or three different users, you have a way to just refactor more easily and make sure that nothing breaks, as that is what our entire jobs are really about, getting to the market faster and as well as making sure that things work and aren't down. So introducing our refactoring mechanism with moved statements. These move statements we'll show in the demo, but basically it's just basically say moved from this resource to this resource. And you can use it to go ahead and say, I'm going to rename a module call, I'm going to rename a resource, or I'm going to enable a count for a module call or resource, or split one large module into multiples. And this could be shared modules. It could be splitting into like multiple different individual modules. It's a really neat feature. And it also gives you just kind of this historical context of like where things have moved. And then when you go ahead and say Terraform plan, it will combine all those state updates as well as to match your configuration. So you don't need to touch state at all. And it's part of that whole plan process. So you can go ahead and say, I know what's going to happen. I can validate that that's exactly what I want to do. I can apply it. And that way, all of those people that we talked about that had not ideal workflows, that was a bit more manual, they can just do this all in one simultaneous step. And that is that.
Nice. Yeah, I know, like I came from software development and you get used to fast, just break it. But once that starts going up, that's not as fun, right? So we were going to have a demo here from Brian. He's going to show us how we can avoid the see no evil, hear no evil concept of hoping things don't break. Before we do though, Chris, did you have any things you want to point out about this before we hop back into code?
I think another thing I'd just touch on is just that, like, it can't be understated just how awesome it is to bring this stuff into the primary Terraform workflow. Like, Terraform is all about making an execution plan and applying it, and kind of anything that you have to do beyond that you've had to do in the past, like do a state move manually, munging state and whatnot. It's so cool to see that configuration driven in the primary workflow, and it kind of plays into what we've been doing with Terraform over the last year, even before this release. So if you're familiar with like 1.0 and what we introduced there, we introduced things like replace and refresh only plans, the ability to be able to tell Terraform, I have these intentions that I want to be part of an execution plan, not just done off on the side willy-nilly in my console, but as part of an execution plan. This is on that same theme of trying to incorporate the workflows that are required in Terraform in that primary workflow.
Nice. And now, drum roll, pass it to Brian, who's going to show us the way.
I will, I guess, show the way. This is the way, as I guess the Mandalorian folks put it. So what we're going to show off here is I'm going to work through a few iterations here. In general, what we'll probably refer to this in general as is just refactoring, right? We have an existing Terraform configuration. In this case, I'll actually go through the whole workflow of starting it up and applying an initial state, and then doing things later on to change and update that state and show off the features here. But yeah, like the really neat thing is that, again, kind of anybody who is working on these configurations, or even outside the configurations, if you're using like, your GitHub repositories and these sorts of things, can propose these refactorings, and they'll just be kind of baked in to the existing workflows. So there's no magic permissions needed to suggest these refactorings a little bit going forward. It's just kind of baked in. So super excited again to be showing this off. For this initial demo here, you can see I'm using VS Code for the record. You can see here that I'm just using the random provider again, and in this case, our lovely friend, the random pet. And here, this resource throughout these demos with like moving things around and making sure that, nothing is changing. That's the real important thing to note here, is that like, as we go through these refactorings, we don't want our pet to change. We don't want our database to change. We don't want our DNS records to change. The idea here being that we're refactoring our configuration to maybe align it more with our team best practices or organization best practices, or moving things around just so they make more sense for folks looking at these configurations. So as always, this is a configuration that is brand new here, so you're going to see this going, and we're going to go ahead and apply it. So Terraform here is going to tell us that, hey, yeah, we're going to create a random pet. And we don't know what it is yet, so please go ahead and give us. We got an awake ostrich. That's very exciting. I hope everybody's had their coffee, because this ostrich is going for it. Okay, so with that, okay, great. We have this ostrich. What are we going to do with it? I don't like this start name, for example. So we, start's cool and all, but like, I don't know. Let's just call it updated. Kind of a boring name, but let's just go with it anyway. So what's going to happen here is if I run Terraform plan again, or, I can run Terraform apply and it'll ask me first, you'll see that, hey, wait a minute, I refreshed it. There's no remote state to refresh. So, okay, great. Like, that was quick. But hey, we're going to destroy our poor awake ostrich and recreate a new one that we don't even know what it is yet. Oh, that's scary. I don't want that. So I'm going to tell Terraform no, please don't do that. That's not what we want here. So, what would we do in this scenario? Normally, in the previous versions of Terraform, is we'd run this Terraform state move, and we'd give it the old resource address and the new resource address in the state. In this case, this is a fairly trivial example. It's just a root resource and the root module with like no extra counts or for eaches. So nothing special there. So we're going to do that. Okay, now what happens if I ask Terraform to plan it? Okay, great. Hey, that was awesome. Like, I didn't have to do anything. I was able to refactor my configuration. Woohoo. Except for all the problems we mentioned before, where it was like, oh, there might be multiple people working on this, or there might be multiple changes in flight. And coordinating these sorts of activities, or having people with the right permissions to apply this sort of change, can really be kind of, burdensome to, a lot of folks. So, and plus, yeah, this is error prone. You have to go in there and make sure that you're typing in like the correct things. Like if I just run this again, I think it should, yeah. Like it's like a very slow process to get like feedback on these sorts of things. And you have to remember that, oh yeah, there's that random state move command. What is that? Okay, so great. Now that we have our awesome infrastructure, okay, let's show off. What's going on here? What is all this hubbub about here? We're talking about these move blocks. We're talking about things. Let's just say I want to make. Let's just call this final. And yeah, let me actually do that and update that. So, okay, great. We got this going on now. Ta-da! Let's introduce this move configuration block. So what we're telling Terraform here to do is we had updated as the old name that was originally in there, and that's now in this from address, and we're going to rename it to final. Sure, sorry for boring naming here, but this will work. We're going to send that to the 2 here. That's the random pet that is going to be final, hopefully. So what's going to happen now? Let's see. Terraform apply. All right. So we refresh it just like before. Oh, but hey, look at this. Terraform is saying, I'm gonna perform this action of moving this for you. There's no other magic here. There's no other things happening. This could be intermixed with all kinds of other changes. So it's not like, oh, this needs to be explicitly done by itself or anything. This is just part of a normal plan or apply. So we could be creating, destroying resources or doing other things just like any other Terraform plan. So if we say yes, hey, look, our awake ostrich is still here. That's wonderful. We like to see that because we like having that thing around, I guess. So that's it basically in a very quick nutshell. Now we can talk about more advanced scenarios because this is where it gets really fun and interesting. So we're going to move over to our little module here. Okay, so we're going to start off with a similar setup. We have a starting pet, in a root module. We can go ahead and just init this. That's great. And if we apply this, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to create it. Let's see what animal we get today. We got a live again. We got a lively bunch of animals here today. Very exciting, but it's a lionfish this time, so that's very exciting. Okay, so great. I have this like Terraform configuration. It's been applied. It's been running in production for forever. This lionfish is going to live for many years. But hey, my team came along and said, hey, this is like really complicated, or like I want to like put this in a Terraform module, for example. So let's just say you go ahead and do that, right? Oh, maybe I'm going to create like what we'll just refer to as a pet module here. And you'll notice it looks almost exactly the same because this is a trivial example, but hopefully the idea here makes sense is that, okay, we can move this over to a module and this configuration can be self-contained. It can be shared with other things, etc. This might not even be local to this Terraform, configuration. It might be some shared, VCS version controlled module. Great. So with that, what would we do in this scenario? And luckily, I have copy pasted myself here to save some time here. So what's going to happen here? We want to move from this root thing that is the random pet that lives at the root module, and we want to move over to this pet module that we've created. So first things first, we don't want this here anymore. We're going to comment that out. We don't want that pet there. We are going to say, hey, here's a module. Let's talk to that pet module that's, over here. Great. We can introduce our move block. So we're going from this random pet that was named root to this module, which I named first, and you'll see why in a second. Random pet, which is great. And, all we need to do here is make sure that our output is correct. So we're going to point back to the output of this module right here, which is called name. So that's why you see that right there. All right. So without further ado, we are going to Terraform apply this. And look at this. So Terraform is already saying, hey, we are going to move this into that module. So nothing special here. Same thing. It worked just like before, whether, it was two resources at the same root level, but now also, hey, we can move root to module, module to root, etc. And we can apply that. And we still have our very alive and well lionfish here ready to go. So that's great. But hey, this lionfish has been around for a while now. I want to say it's my favorite. So what was I thinking a few years ago? I called this first. Let's call it favorite. So what we can do here is actually take what was the old address, because it used to be called the first module in here, and let's call it favorite now, because this is my favorite pet. We just fix all the references, save that, and if we apply this, Terraform, yet again, will do what we're expecting here. We can move things, we can rename modules, we can do whatever we need to do. Now comes the interesting one. Let's say we have our favorite pet here, but I don't know, I created this module and this just isn't really doing it for me. What if I wanted to be that, right? All right, let's just go with that. So normally when you do this, hey, yeah, like this might be a public Terraform module that was created, written somewhere else, not in, managed by you or anything. Ooh, yikes. I'm going to have to send instructions to people, make sure they keep their lionfishes alive. This is going to be bad. So why don't we make it not bad and actually perform the move in here? And I'm going to just be lazy and copy paste this again. So we're just going to rename our random pet from this to that. And this is within the module. So we're not applying this level. We're actually applying up at this level where, we've defined a favorite thing. I don't know what's going on. That's awesome though. So let's see if Terraform will allow us as a module author, for example, to go move these things. And look at that. So, Terraform is suggesting, just as you would expect, I can move from this to that within the module. So like as a module author, I could have gone in and done this refactoring, and this can live on. So let me go ahead and apply this. Now, something very interesting with the moved configuration blocks is, especially as module authors, for example, now that this move is done, this move block can stay there, but it doesn't have to. So something very fun to do is, hey, if this is a configuration that I just owned, like it is here, for example, I can go in here and remove this configuration block, and Terraform is not going to do anything. It's not going to be any different than it was before. So for public module authors, for example, this is great. Basically, for all the changes and refactorings that you want to happen, you can keep these move statements around. But let's say in the next major version, you want to tell folks, hey, upgrade to version 1, then version 2, then version 3, so I can clean up my code. Then you can have this sort of workflow for that major release. Oh, I got rid of the move blocks out of my code. It's no longer, quote unquote, cluttering it up, and Terraform will do the right thing. Another interesting fact with these move blocks is that I don't have a demo here to show, but if we do have time, I could do it live, and that could be very exciting. You should be able to chain these together as well. So if I had multiple refactorings that happened over time, I might have a from address that points to a to address, and then another move block that points to that to address of that previous move block and changes it to another address in the state. So theoretically, all that should just work as you would expect, where you can just go down, turtles all the way down here and just keep chaining these things together like a chain chomper or something. So great. So this is awesome. I'm kind of showing this off, locally here. It does work with Terraform Cloud, for example. Again, I'm not doing anything too special here. I am using this fancy new cloud block because it's awesome, and you should use it too. But yeah, same thing here. There's nothing special. If I go and hit my cloud-based thing, okay, great. I'm going to Terraform apply that. We're going to reach out to Terraform Cloud. We're going to go run this. So waiting for the plan to start. Doing things. Gotta love that live streaming output. I love that about Terraform Cloud too, by the way. So great. So hey, it's asking us, do we want to create a random pet? Any guesses for what names we're going to get? Let's see. I'm gonna tell Terraform, yes,
will it be awake or alive?
We got an absolute panther this time. All right. But again, there's no magic here. This is in Terraform Cloud. It doesn't matter. I can go in here. I can, change this to new, change this to new, do this. Terraform apply that.
Yeah, man, that's so cool. You're right about the whole chaining thing. I'm just imagining as a module author, if you need to do multiple moves or whatever, and you have someone that's updating that module more than one, maybe it's not a good idea, of course, but more than one breaking change ahead or whatever, instead of the right combination of state move commands, the ability to be able to just fast forward via all of those move statements is pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's super cool to see it in action. hopefully folks will really love this because it's super helpful to kind of jump out of that like special workflow and get into the plan apply workflow. And hey, our Panther's sticking around here. It's the new thing. And I think that's all I had to demo for this. So please ask questions. Happy to answer things. Very exciting.
Yeah, that all looked great, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's it paints a way forward to do these bigger refactors, which is always helpful because, you know, we're usually trying to think about where we're trying to go as opposed to the implementation of getting the specific thing done. So it's nice to see that we have a clear way to get there. Nice. So we have some questions. I have a good number of questions. But before we do that, you know, Korinne or Chris, were there any things that you wanted to point out as we went that you think were good to highlight?
Honestly, no, Brian, you did a great demo. Covered all the important bits and pieces.
I did see a question pop in there about count. You know, for each was the question. This absolutely works with count and for each as well. So I didn't demo it here, but you can take, for example, a resource that maybe has a bunch of count and convert it to for each, or convert it to those sorts of things where, oh, I want to move these to different modules and that sort of thing as well. So definitely want to call that out as well. That count and for each are in there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was one of the questions. So nice. So since we're on those questions, why don't we go ahead and answer some of the other ones? So the next question was, can I move this resource can I move resources between provider? So you can see the question right there in the chat, right?
Yes, that is a great question. So the current Terraform 1.1 abilities is for moving with the same resource type. So for example, I can move an AWS VPC to an AWS VPC or a random pet to a random pet. You know, the idea is hopefully in the future that there will be some abilities there. I can't go into
in. Yeah. Yeah. So, hey, Anton, feel free to reach out and we can talk more about like specific use cases. You can also open up a GitHub issue about like what things that are out of scope for this specific release, but you'd like to see in the future. And we're really, really excited about this. And especially since a lot of our users are constantly needing to refactor their Terraform configurations. It's something that we're going to continuously invest in. So while we don't have, I can't like committed dates right now, it's something that we're looking into.
Nice. So our next question then is, will the moved block be backported to the 0.13 version? I know that this answer may not be straightforward, but let's give it a good old try here.
I can't really give any commitments quite yet. We're just really celebrating the 1.1 release that just came out, but I'd be really happy to follow up with you about plans on that one.
Nice. Yep, that's always the thing. If there's not necessarily something that we have on hand right now, we're always willing to hop on and have a conversation, and at the very least, put that on our radar, right? So, and then the last question: are there plans to automatically generate moved blocks based on a diff with previous runs?
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was looking at that one. That one does seem very interesting. I'd love, Anton, again, if you want to reach out and talk more, would love to. I think that there's a lot of questions to be had in there around like user intention, right? The ability to be able to figure out user intent from one previous state to another is definitely a tricky and interesting problem. So, you know, if that can be solved, that would be awesome. But there's a lot of complexity in there to kind of unravel. So I'm eager to ponder that one.
Thank you for the answers. And that was great because I know towards the end when we're going to talk about the future, we're going to say what would people like to see, and here we're already seeing some of it. So great. Okay, so those were our two bigger features. We've got some smaller quality of life ones, among other things that are not, I don't want to call them small because they're by no means small, but they'll just take less time for us to go into. So for time, why don't we go ahead and move into that third feature? We've got some changes to plan and apply. As Brian and Korinne have said, we're trying to move towards making plan and apply everything happen around this. So Korinne, could you give us some of the insight and everything in the general overview of what's changed to those two big commands?
Sorry, one more time. I was just looking at the chat. I'm so sorry.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's the fun part of live streaming, right? We got to have multiple conversations. Then we've got some bigger changes happening. So multiple changes happening to plan and apply. I know that Brian's going to take us through a demo of zoomed in on the destroy thing. But since there are so many changes happening in the plan and apply, what is the goal here for these changes in 1.1 to those two commands?
I'm actually probably going to toss it over to Brian. I think that he would have a lot more information than I would at this point. So off to you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so something kind of fun that got introduced into Terraform 1.1 was, how can we augment some of the Terraform plan output when infrastructure is being destroyed? One of the questions that gets asked a lot, especially with like larger configurations or complex configuration, is, what actually caused this destroy of a resource to occur? And it might be an instance of something if it's a counter for each type thing. But like what physically caused this resource to be proposed as being removed, for example? And again, this kind of boils into a little bit of like the refactoring work that people might be doing. But destroying infrastructure is scary. So it's when we have the ability to kind of explain things a little bit clearer, I think that's helpful for everybody to make it a little less scary and hopefully make a debug, if it's necessary to debug a situation, a little bit easier in that sense.
Perfect. Yeah. The more, destroying stuff, you've always got that like the sweat meme, like, all right. And especially when you go and something pops up and you're like, whoa, why is that going? What's going on? So you've got a demo for us here, I believe, Brian?
Yeah.
All right.
So hey, we're gonna follow up with more pets here because we love our pets. But let's go ahead and get this started. So I'm going to start again from clean slate here. And these demos will be much quicker than the last two. So don't be alarmed as they go a little bit quicker here. So in this configuration, we have a random pet that doesn't have any counter for each or anything. We have a counted random pet. So we're going to create two there. And a for each one, lovely named just first and second within that for each there. So Terraform's going to propose to add 5 because that's 1 + 2 + 2. That looks great. Let's go ahead and see what animals we have. We have an included cat, a helped halibut. Ooh, that's fun. A smooth manatee, a proven bobcat, and an ethical loon. All right. So what is all this annotation stuff, our destroy enhancements that we're talking about? So if I make this change here, let's say I remove a resource from the configuration completely. What happens? Normally Terraform in previous versions would just say, oh, hey, I'm just destroying this. But if we run this, we can actually see because removed is not in the configuration anymore. That's pretty nice. Wow. Okay. Now I know exactly why that's occurring rather than just the fact that it's occurring. So if we go ahead and apply that, sorry, halibut, didn't mean to. That's great. Counts, great. And we're gonna decrease it by 1, see what happens. And in this case, oh look, now it's telling us because the index was out of range. Hey, it used to be 2, now it's 1. That number 1 index, because it's 0 based, is removed. So very exciting. Sorry, animals. Poor manatee. And finally, same sort of thing with for each. It's going to hopefully give us a little bit clearer answer here because the key second there is no longer in the for each map. So if you can imagine, if you have a bunch of modules and a bunch of complicated things going on in your configuration, it may be completely unclear to you why something is occurring, especially when it's destroying. So the hope here is that having those extra little, annotations in there can really help debug these sorts of things and make it less scary.
Yeah, absolutely. That just those little things, just the little signals here and there make the process more. Just it adds to the smoothness of the entire thing. The more the better. Thank you. Was there any other things around that either Chris or Korinne you wanted to highlight? It was pretty straightforward. Yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't actually know about this feature. So it's so cool. It is so cool. Like the context again, like the introspection into like why Terraform did a thing, like what the intentions are, is really, really cool to be able to see as an end user.
Absolutely. And so far, our one question is, do we know how many unique pets there are in the random pet resource?
That is a great question. I actually do not know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I'm very curious.
I don't actually know, but there is an RFC for it. Like there's a IEE like RFC from some yesteryear that it's based off of. So you can actually go read the RFC if you really want to, dig into that.
That's amazing. That reminds me of like the carrier pigeon protocol that exists as an RFC as well. Just in case you need avian carriers for your packets, they got you covered.
Nice. Well, moving right along, that was the only questions we had around that. Why don't we go ahead and step into the next feature on our plate here, and that was nullable variables. So Brian, since you're going to be doing the demo as well, if you'd like to kick us off with some information around it, some context, and of course, Korinne, Chris, please feel free to jump in and point anything out if it's needed.
Yeah, so happy to jump into this one pretty quickly. And this is an interesting case where previously in Terraform configurations, and because it kind of existed when Terraform 1.0 was released, this kind of default behavior kind of has to stick around for a bit. But essentially what can happen, you can sort of see in this configuration here, is that basically there might be situations where modules might get passed in a null input, for example. And what would happen in this situation in previous versions of Terraform is that this would actually overwrite any sort of default value. Basically, you couldn't convince Terraform to give you the module default value for that variable if you passed in null. It would actually forcibly just pass null through. So in a lot of situations, actually, that can be kind of undesirable because it seems a little bit different than the rest of how like Terraform configurations work in general. So if you have like a resource and you have an argument that may or may not be like optionally turned on, for example, you would just put null in there, and then it would do what you would hopefully expect in that case of like, oh, if I get to that null case, I'm just not going to include this argument at all. But in this case, this previous versions of Terraform, this would actually pass this null in. So that kind of difference in behavior was kind of the impetus for adding this ability within variables to say they are nullable. And you can say whether they can or can't be nullable, and you can still keep your defaults or not keep defaults depending on your use case. Do you have folks have any questions before I just like dive into this?
Not I.
All right. So
looks good,
let's do it. So in this case, I'll show off what all the code that's involved here. It's very complicated. It is just we have a Terraform module that's local here, and it has a variable called in. It has a default value. That is, default value is a string. And we have an out, that is the output. So from our root module here, or some other module calling this module, we're going to call into this example module, and we're going to pass in null. So that's going to be interesting. So this is the current behavior of all Terraform versions, even including 1.1. I want to make that clear, is that this behavior is not actually changing. And what's interesting here is I told it explicitly, I want this example output from this module here to be the output of this module over here. That's interesting. That's not what I expected. I expected default value to be passed through, basically. So what can we do in this scenario? In Terraform 1.1, there's this new nullable argument that you can pass into variables. So if I set this, and there's a whole documentation page on it that goes through the different scenarios and what it'll do. But in this case, I basically want to say, yeah, basically, I want my null to actually be respected here. I'm not passing it in. So hopefully, if I talked about it correctly and explained it correctly, you can actually see it here. Yes. So here now, as soon as I put that in, now it's actually respecting that default value that existed inside the module. So again, this is like one of those scenarios where you might be working with multiple modules and trying to conditionally turn on and off things. And it can be very confusing to all of a sudden like not have something not show up as an input into a module. So that's where this is coming from. And the cool thing here is that you can also kind of get rid of this default. And if I'm doing this correctly, excellent. So essentially, we can have it so, oh, there's no default, and you technically didn't pass it anything here. This is null. This is pretending like that line doesn't exist in the configuration now. Now Terraform will give you an error. So really cool stuff. And again, you can use default and nullable with true. You can use this nullable with true or false depending on your situation. But essentially, yeah, it's basically just a much more flexible way to, and much more consistent way to work with nulls that are getting passed through to resources, or modules, excuse me.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and this seems like something too that you know, as you're going, if you're moving quickly, can just fly under the radar, and then you just look up and you're like, whoa, where'd everything go? Where'd the value go? So yeah. So was there more to the wonderful demo here, Brian? Because that was
no. This again, these last ones are nice and easy. So
yeah, I figured. Yeah. So we do have a question for you here. If a user wants to use null as an input value, even if the module has nullable, so what happens in this case if a user really wants to use null?
Yeah, so the documentation should go through all the different scenarios that's possible here. It depends on whether you have default set or not, basically. But it is possible to say true in here, for example. And I think what it should do is that there will be no output from the root module, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so there you go. It's going from that default value, and since we got rid of it from the variable, now it's saying there's not going to be any value there. So it should be doing what you kind of expect there as well.
Nice. And then a follow-up, passing null through the Terraform CLI.
I am not positive if that's possible today, but definitely make sure there is a issue open on the Terraform CLI repo if it's not possible today.
Sweet. And for anyone else watching, you know, if you have questions, answer them. Even if the thing's not there, the only way we're going to know about these things to improve going forward is if y'all bring them up. So any feedback you have is always appreciated. Okay. So awesome. So nullable variable is doing what you would expect, especially when you're going through modules. Thank you so much, Brian. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to call upon your demo superpowers again because we got one more feature, smaller, that is going to answer a question we had earlier about, let me go back and find it here, just debugging and troubleshooting variables. So for example, to get the values of variables through multiple modules. And so this is going to come onto the Terraform console command. So would you like to kick it off here?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in general, when we talk about debugging kind of Terraform configurations, the way that is possible today, there's kind of two main ways, I guess, that are possible. The quick one is, you can use outputs, for example, to kind of, I want to grab this value and just kind of output it somewhere in the CLI just to make it visible. That's like a quick and easy way to do something. The other way that is possible is with Terraform console, the Terraform console command, to be specific. And the Terraform console command, basically, if you have a Terraform state that exists, you can call into Terraform console and you can ask it questions about that state. So inside of that Terraform console, which we'll show in a little bit, it's kind of like a input, it's like a shell almost. So basically you give it a quick command, whether that be a function. Say, for example, I want to run the lookup function on some variable or local. without actually modifying my configuration or anything, okay, yeah, you can kind of pass that along in there, and it'll give you the output of what was going on inside of there, just as if you were doing it via configuration. So yeah, I hope that sort of gives a little bit of insight into like the 10,000 foot view of debugging, complex types and variables and things. The feature here in 1.1 is that a type, TYPE function was added to the Terraform console command. And basically, when you're working in certain scenarios with very complex configurations or complex conditionals, sometimes Terraform might show some interesting errors that you might not expect. Oh, I passed in this list that looks like exactly like this other list on the side of a conditional, but Terraform's saying it's not. And how you would have to debug that before is kind of what I was describing, where you'd have to go in the Terraform console and maybe output the value itself to try to see if it's kind of obvious what's different there. But what this function is then now allowing folks who are doing this kind of advanced troubleshooting to do is actually take a look at the types that Terraform internally is seeing. So whether that be strings, tuples, maps, lists, sets, etc. So let me dive into that. Again, this will be super. This one will actually, I think, is probably the quickest here. So let's go here. Okay, so we have a configuration. Just to keep this very, very simple, it's a variable with a default value. It looks like a list. It's a tuple, technically, and you'll see that in a second. And then we have this other local here. That's another example. It's a little bit more complicated looking. Oh, that looks kind of scary. But hey, we want to output something from either of these two. If our original variable was like an empty tuple, empty list as it looks like, we wanted to output that. Otherwise, we want to output this other thing. Great. So what the heck is going to happen when I run this? If I run Terraform apply, it is going to say the two sides of my conditional don't actually line up. And that's a little confusing. I don't know. I see these, brackets here. That's exciting. There's brackets here. What's going on? So if we take a look at Terraform console here, it'll give us that same warning just because, there's actually an error in the configuration. But it should allow us to do in here is basically, yes, yeah. We can use this new type function to go say, hey, oh, what is that var variable thing? It's a tuple with a string in it. And we can do the same thing with the other one as well. And hopefully, this is just another kind of advanced troubleshooting technique that can be helpful, where it's like, oh, I need to get these two things to look exactly alike. So Terraform is a little bit happier. What do I need to change to make them look exactly the same? So in this case, you could say, oh, okay, so there's objects involved and all these sorts of things that maybe is influencing why Terraform is not doing what I expect here. And that's really it for this. Just wanted to shout it out as just like advanced troubleshooting technique.
Yeah, the more information you can get during that process, the better. So thank you for walking through that. We did have a quick question, which is why the type function is only available in the console.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if there's any technical limitations on it, but I believe the reasoning behind it was that it's only kind of applicable to debugging, more so than something that would actually be useful to pass around to other things. For example, there's nothing, you can't take this type output and use it for some other place currently within Terraform. So like another part of the Terraform configuration can't take this output and do something useful with it. So I believe the idea there was to kind of separation of concerns there. Maybe it's possible that it could be implemented and you could output the type output as normal, but currently today it's implemented as just this in the console.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that, Brian. Thank you for the questions, Anton. So that brings us to the end of the features we were going to cover today. So 5 really, really big ones, right? We had everything with Terraform, the Terraform cloud experience, and swapping out the remote backends to that new cloud block, which was awesome. With the moved block, so refactoring, we went in depth with modules there, so that's going to help a lot with module authors and refactoring around that area. Then after that, we went through the plan and apply changes to destroy, followed by nullable variables, and finally here we are at the end, seeing the type function. A lot of good stuff in 1.1, and since we're running a little long on the stream, I wanted to kind of accelerate forward to what happens next, what's coming next, what's in 1.2, what's in 2022, right? I know that y'all have probably have some plans or some knowledge that you can allude to, so I wanted to toss that question first towards Korinne. If someone asks you what's coming for Terraform 1.2 in 2022, what would you tell them?
Putting me in the hot seat. Yeah, so this makes my job really difficult, but I can't speak a ton about what we're actually committing to. But I will say that we're researching projects right now specifically around improving ways to test Terraform modules. So if you are interested in providing feedback on that specific utility, please reach out. I'd love to talk with you and get your use cases down. And pretty much that's all I can really say. I'm sorry.
All good, all good. And as we're doing this discussion, for those of you watching, if you have any questions or things that you would like to see, we've already had some people shout out some of those things. Please put them in because we can have some conversation here. And let me go ahead and put us back to the normal view here so we can see everyone. So continuing with that question, Chris, and I know that in our conversation you said something that you could at least hint to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add on to what Korinne said about testing as one, like, I don't know, I guess I call it implementation of an even bigger idea, and that is like assertions in Terraform. Like, we want to be able to give tooling around making sure that things are behaving as you expect them to, maybe before you apply them or maybe after you apply them, like more so than even just testing stuff. The broader idea of just being able to have more confidence in asserting conditions is kind of something that we're toying around with and looking at for Terraform 1.2.
And then Brian, bringing us in from the provider perspective. If you still have any energy after us throwing 4 demos on you here.
No, it's totally fine, and happy to do it. Something interesting, totally unrelated to Terraform CLI here, is that my team, the provider development experience team, is really excited to have a new provider development framework in the works. We've been working really hard on that, so definitely want to shout out to that. That's ongoing work, so can absolutely talk about that. But yeah, from the Terraform kind of core perspective here with the CLI and everything, I'm hopeful that a lot of the research that kind of went into making these move blocks possible can be expanded further. And I think there's a lot of will and hope there that can potentially happen. So very excited for the future there.
Yeah, I'd say it even goes back to that theme of, like, primary workflow type stuff. Like, I think we've seen a lot of really good success, a lot of really good feedback towards taking these things that were kind of like these weird secondary workflows that are like essential to using Terraform every day, but not part of the primary workflow. Everything that we've done so far, moving in that direction, has really been very positive and a really big improvement. So I think you'll probably see a lot more of that in the future.
Awesome. So I know that we're coming here towards the end of stuff. If you have these improvements, these issues, please reach out to really any of us. Go to check out the GitHub repo. I know that yeah, we hit the things and we may take some time to respond, but we do see it. So please continue being diligent in your feedback. We really appreciate it a lot. Okay, so this brings us here to the end of things. Thank you so much, Brian, Korinne, and Chris, joining, giving your insights, your feedback, all of the great demos, answering all of the different questions for us. It's a huge help to the community. Gives us a place for people to come and faces to talk to rather than just avatars, right, on GitHub issues. So it's much appreciated. And thank you for everyone who tuned in, for contributing to the chat and everything. That always helps, keeps things lively. And thank you to all the users, customers, and members who make all of this possible. So if you are new to Terraform, please make sure you check out our learn.hashicorp.com platform, our Learn platform there. We've got all sorts of stuff for beginners, intermediate, all the way up to very specific use cases, so you can get your information there. Also, if you're interested in collaboration, being more specific about your feedback, seeing what other people are saying, check out the GitHub repo. And then for everything else, terraform.io, our main website, is kind of the hub for every single thing else that maybe isn't mentioned here. And that's pretty much it. That brings us to the end of 2021. Any last words, Brian, Korinne, or Chris?
Really quickly, we actually have a Learn tutorial for trying out the new move statements as well as migrating from S3 to Terraform Cloud. I'll quickly send a link, and yeah, you should all try it out.
Nice. Yeah, let me post that link right inside the chat here. So there, we've got that up. And then Chris, Brian, any last shout outs you'd like to do?
Just thanks to the community. It's been fun 2021, and I'm really looking forward to a lot of the stuff that we'll get into next year.
Yeah, I definitely want to say, thank you to everybody who contributes, whether that be discussions or GitHub issues or, feature requests and all those sorts of things. All the feedback is extremely helpful, and thank you for making Terraform a great product, because it takes a village to build this thing. It's not just, us folks chatting here. There's lots of other engineers and product folks and everything involved as well, and absolutely the community. So it's amazing to see it actually working in progress.
Nice. All right. Well, that wraps up our community office hours for Terraform. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and I hope you have a happy holidays. Until next year.